Hey everyone, welcome back to the Collector's Compass, the official podcast of Collectors MD, where we explore the intersection of collecting, mental wellness, and responsible engagement across every corner of the hobby. I'm your host, Alyx Efron, founder of Collectors MD, and today's guest brings a truly unique and important perspective, one that sits at the intersection of clinical recovery, public health, and reform. Ryan Roelans is the president and CEO of Better Way of Miami, a respected recovery organization that's helped thousands of people rebuild their lives. He's a licensed clinical social worker, adjunct professor at Florida International University, and has spent over 15 years in behavioral health, leading treatment, teaching, and now advocacy. Ryan's background in addiction recovery gives him a lens we don't often hear in the collecting world, but it's one we desperately need. Because when we talk about compulsive spending, gambling-like behaviors, or the psychological pull of the hobby, it's not that different from what happens in other forms of addiction. So today, we're diving into how therapy principles and harm reduction apply to collecting, what real reform might look like in the hobby, and how we can build healthier systems, both personally and collectively, without losing what we love. Ryan, my man, welcome to the Collector's Compass. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me, Alex. Pleasure.
Awesome. Like we were talking about before we jumped in, would love for you to provide just a quick intro of who you are. I know I sort of already set the table, but just tell our listeners a little bit about you, your history with your career, and everything that you're doing at Better Way of Miami.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. You all are doing amazing work for the community. So I kudos to you. It's always weird talking about myself. My name is Ryan Roelans. I am the president and CEO of Better Way of Miami. We're a residential non-for-profit treatment center located in South Florida. We've been around since 1984. We primarily serve the homeless population, dually diagnosed substance use, and mental health. We also have permanent supportive housing programs, and we are also building a navigation center that should be opening up in March that we are very excited about. I also am a professor at Florida International University. I've been teaching there now about 8 years. I teach in the graduate school and have taught 2 of the 3 classes specific to substance use and mental health treatment. So I've been in the field for about, as you said, 15 years, focusing primarily on substance use, addiction, and mental health, specifically for me, severe mental illness.
Awesome. All right, let's dive in. Appreciate that, Ryan. That's super helpful context for, I think, everybody listening. So we're going to dive into our first segment, which is recovery to collecting, the power of awareness. So I want to start with something that you brought up when we were planning this, and it's something that we talk about at a great length at Collectors MD. So you mentioned exploring abstinence versus harm reduction, which is what we practice in a form called intentional collecting, and how those models might translate to collecting. So in addiction treatment, those are very different philosophies, right? So can you break down how you think those approaches could apply to collecting behaviors, things like overspending, impulse buying, or the thrill of the chase?
Absolutely. It's funny, as you asked that question, I'm sitting here looking at about 3,000 vinyl records. So I myself have had issues with intentional collecting, right? So it's interesting, and maybe I can share a little bit about when I got back into the hobby as well, and really kind of why I started thinking about this in that respect. I got back into the hobby about 3 years ago, and when I say got back into it, I was into it very hard when I was a kid, like most of us were. And about 3 years ago, dug up some of my old cards, looked them up, had some value there. I have 2 beautiful girls myself, got back into going to card shows. Those things started happening, and those brought up good memories for me, right?
Sure.
Getting back into it, I think in the beginning, it's going to card shows, enjoying, buying one card here, buying one card there, and then finding things like whatnot, and these different things that are available to go on and buy, and then recognizing um, that the hobby has changed completely from when I was a kid. From when I was a kid, at least from what I remember, it was more about you getting a pack and getting that person that you wanted, and you didn't care if it was some type of special card or some card worth $4,000 or what have you, right? It was just that you had, for me, it was like Gary Sheffield or whoever it was that was very important to you, Allen Iverson. So, I think when it comes back, to go back to your question in regards to harm reduction, um, for me personally, I saw how it could get very dangerous very quickly. Um, I I automatically, after collecting for about 6 months, was already kind of thinking about putting limits on my spending, just because of the way I think that the hobby is formatted today, where it is very hard to have self-control, looking at it from a more of a harm reduction type of lens, right? Because you're constantly inundated through social media to get back on the apps and go spend and this and that, right? So um, there's a very fine balance, and this kind of goes back to recovery in general, right? Most treatment centers are abstinence-based types of approaches, right? AA and
Right.
NA sometimes are abstinence-based also. Um, it, I think opening up the dialogue to this is very important, but can also, it just depends on the individual, right? If a person has the self-control to buy a little bit at a time and they're okay with that, then that's one thing. But if a person, based on their history, is unable to have that type of self-control, then that's kind of a different story, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's such an important distinction because in the world of collecting, you can actually see both philosophies sort of play out, right? In traditional addiction recovery, abstinence means complete separation from the activity, right? No
Yeah.
contact with the substance or behavior, whether that's alcohol, gambling. And for some people, that's absolutely necessary. But when you apply that to our world of collecting, it's not always realistic or even desirable. Most
Yeah.
collectors don't want to just quit the hobby entirely, something
Yeah.
that they've done since they were children. They just want to stop feeling controlled by it, right? So that's where harm reduction comes in. And so at Collectors MD, our version of harm reduction, again, is what we call intentional collecting. It's about learning to engage in the hobby with awareness, structure, and accountability without letting it just take over your finances, your time, your mental health. And so on the other side of that is abstinence. And, in this context, it might look like taking a complete break, whether that be temporarily or permanently,
Yeah.
stepping away from things like breaks or auctions or even social media to help you reset your relationship with collecting, right? So harm reduction, on the other hand, might mean setting spending limits or tracking purchases or avoiding certain triggers like late night live streams or high risk chase products, both of which we see across these streaming platforms like Whatnot, Fanatics, Loop, eBay, etc. But still staying connected to the parts of the hobby that actually bring us joy and meaning. So rather than saying like, I've quit collecting altogether, it becomes I have to change how I collect, right? It's not about eliminating the behavior altogether, it's about intention over impulse. And for most people, that's where sustainable recovery in this space really starts. So I love the way you framed it, again, because at Collectors MD, intentional collecting is such an important part of everything we do. It's not about, quitting the hobby. It's about changing how you show up in it, learning to pause, again, ask why, and to understand the emotions behind the purchase instead of just reacting to them. So from your clinical lens, Ryan, what do you see as the first step toward that kind of awareness? And how do people start noticing their patterns before they start to spiral?
Well, if we let's say bring this back to substance use, right? There's specific phases when it comes to use. You go into use to misuse into abuse, right?
Right.
I mean, you can pretty much take those same types of concepts and funnel them into this, right? So, one thing is using, purchasing of cards that doesn't have any, you know, definable impact on your day-to-day life. It doesn't have any impact on your relationships, things of that nature. The thing to look out for is when, you're having trouble paying your bills this week because of your spending. You're having individuals, mention things about how many how much time you're spending either on the apps or how much money you're spending. um, you know you're isolating socially. All of the kind of same behaviors that you would see, I would say, in substance use can probably translate over, right? Because again, it's just kind of compulsive behaviors in general. I think if you notice that happening, it's nice to kind of take a step back, and then also finding support through networks like yours, right? Through Collectors MD,
Absolutely.
where you have different ideas of how to approach the hobby. Because if you're isolated and you don't know anything about these concepts, how do you know how to actually like continue in the hobby, enjoy the hobby without it consuming you completely?
Yeah. And for the longest time, young, uneducated people, impressionable people sort of didn't have that compass, right? They didn't know which direction to go in. They just sort of listen to the influencers, they listen to the platforms, the manufacturers, they get sucked in by predatory marketing tactics, and they wind up in these scenarios, these situations where they look back and they're like, what have I done? Right. And it all happens so quickly, it escalates. And then suddenly one day you realize I might have a problem. And again, for the longest time, and the sports card and trading card hobbies specifically have been around for decades, right? People have been collecting cards since the early 1900s. And
Yeah.
so, up until recently, when break culture was introduced and became mainstream in the space, there's really been nowhere for those people to go. There's no support system, there's no guardrails, there's no oversight. And so that's where I saw such a massive need, right? There was so much demand for this. And now that it exists, we have been doing our very best to help dozens of people on a daily and weekly basis through things like our weekly support meetings, our group chat, our Discord, social media presence, partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really important. And again, we honor both lanes, whether it's intentional collecting or abstinence. We understand that everybody is different, and we intend to meet you wherever you are in your journey and support you accordingly. So, with that said, brought up some really powerful points. Awareness isn't, all about recovery by itself, but it's where recovery begins. And you can't change what you can't see. So, we're going to transition over to our next segment, which is the illusion of control and understanding compulsion. So, one thing that I've noticed is that both in collecting and gambling, there's this illusion of control. People convince themselves things like, I know I beat the odds, or, I'll stop after this next hit. So, what's going on psychologically in that moment when logic goes out the window and compulsion starts to take over?
It's an interesting question. So, looking at this through, let's say, like a physiological lens, right? And the way that our brain works when we're engaged in these types of compulsive behaviors. Essentially, we're working on that kind of primal impulsive part of our brain, and the logical, part of our brain that has that capacity for thinking towards the future, logical, rational thought, is not actively at the helm, right? So
Right.
we're essentially working on those kind of primal instincts, same kind of instinctual drives that relate back to sex and food and hunger and survival, right?
Sure.
So the dangerous things with gambling, card collecting, substance use, all of these things is it essentially works on that primal part of our brain, and that it relates back to survival. So then our brain is essentially tricked to think that it needs this in order to survive,
Right.
which makes it so dangerous. At the same time, the we're basically creating neural pathways towards specific feelings by using reinforcers. And through creating those neural pathways, those are the things that we take. This is how we become happy. This is how we feel fulfilled, right? And the more and more that we engage in those behaviors, that just becomes kind of the go-to behavior versus trying something completely different.
Yeah, exactly. And you're describing what we see every day in the hobby, right? It's the same loop of reward, regret, and rationalization. And I think what's tricky is that unlike drugs or alcohol, this stuff is socially acceptable and even celebrated, right? Platforms gamify it, influencers glamorize it. Everything is just glorified now. And it's forced down our throats 24/7. So how does someone separate genuine passion for a hobby from a pattern that's quietly harming them?
That's an interesting question. I would say through reflection, through reaching out and engaging in these types of support networks, or speaking with friends, family about your patterns of behavior. If you feel completely okay with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, you should be okay discussing it with another person. If you
Right,
don't feel okay about how you're behaving on a day-to-day, and you probably will not want to have that discussion with somebody, right? Unless it gets
right,
really bad where you kind of have to. So again, and back to your other point, it's, we have treatment centers for substance use. We have all these support networks out there if you need the help. This is kind of so new that it's very limited in regards to who do I turn to for assistance with
right,
this. It doesn't have the same stigma as, drugs or alcohol or these different things, right? Which makes it more dangerous, I mean, to really kind of fall into.
right.
People don't look at it in a negative light. It's very accepted. It's very kind of the thing to do now with these gambling apps and things like that, right? And especially for young people who are still developing, it's very dangerous. I go on Whatnot and such, and I can imagine most of the people on there are in their, early 20s, for the most part, except for some of the older guys like me that are on there. But so it can be very dangerous because it's very sneaky, because it doesn't have that stigma or awareness out there about kind of the dangers surrounding.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It is a tough question, and it's something we talk a lot at Collectors MD. And the real difference between passion and compulsion usually comes down to why you're doing it and how it feels afterwards, right? With
Yeah.
passion, it's fulfilling. You're connected to the story, the memory, the meaning behind it. You can walk away satisfied. Compulsion, it's draining. You're chasing relief, not joy. You feel anxious if you're not buying or watching a break, and regret creeps in after, right? And we tell people if collecting stops feeling exciting and starts feeling heavy or necessary, then that's a sign. And that's when it shifts from healthy to harmful. And so the goal isn't always to quit collecting, it's just to collect differently. It's to move from reaction to intention. And so, yeah, this part of the conversation I think really hits home for a lot of people. And when people reach out to Collectors MD and they say they're not sure if they have a problem, they just know it doesn't feel good anymore. It can be confusing, right? And I always tell them you don't have to hit bottom to start getting better. You just have to notice something's off, right? Not everybody that comes to us necessarily has a problem or is addicted or
Yeah.
needs clinical support. They just want to continue their passion and what they love with more intention, more mindfully, more thoughtfully, with more, responsibility and accountability. And so those things are really, really important. We don't want people to automatically assume that Collectors MD is this anti-hobby, anti-breaking, anti-gambling machine that just preaches abstinence all day. I mean, that's certainly a part of it to an extent, but again, we have two very distinct lanes.
I think that's a good, I think people need to also realize that the mechanisms to get them to spend are so great, and the amount of money and marketing and things that are going on in the social media and to get you to spend, if you don't have something on the other side in regards to a balance, right? Something that you can look to kind of make sure that that stuff is not influencing you too much. I think it's very, very important, whether that's through self-reflection or taking breaks or reaching out to support networks like yourself. But it's just very dangerous, and it's kind of the reality of the world that we live in now.
Yeah.
And we're really kind of starting to kind of see the negative effects of this. But it's just being cognizant of the fact that those mechanisms, those apps are meant to get you to engage in compulsive behaviors.
Exactly.
That's their job.
Yeah.
So
They are designed and engineered in a very strategic way. Some may call it predatory, some may call it exploitative, but at the end of the day, they do have a job, and that's to drive revenue. And they're not concerned about your mental health. They're not concerned about any sort of burnout or fallout that are coming from these impulsive purchasing decisions. And so you have to protect yourself at the end of the day. And some people need that professional guidance, that professional support. And so that's where Collectors MD comes in. So with that, we're going to transition over to our next segment, which is reform and responsibility. And so building safer systems. And something else that you brought up when we were going back and forth on Instagram that really stuck with me is pushing these issues to legislators. Right? You've spent years dealing with things like policy and regulation and behavioral health. What do you think responsible reform could look like in the hobby without over-regulating it or taking the joy away?
It's a very good question. I think first is just bringing awareness of the issue. Even let's say when I attend these national conferences, the biggest conference for behavioral health in Florida is Florida Behavioral Health Association's conference in Orlando, which is once a year. It's rare that you even, out of, let's say, 60 different lectures, you might see like one specific to gambling, right? This is really kind of where politicians engage with individuals in the field and learn about behavioral health and what's going on. And it really kind of gives you an idea of what's the agenda, what are the priority things, what are the best practices that are going on in the field today, right? So if gambling is kind of at the end of the totem pole, I don't even think that this is necessarily on the spectrum, so it's really one, creating awareness with those individuals, those people who are in positions of power, to let them know about kind of what's going on and that there needs to be some type of reform, right? But then you have the discussion regarding what is too much regulation versus education and prevention work, right?
Right.
I think just like when it comes to casinos and things, this similar types of prevention and things that they have, mechanisms that are made available to individuals who do have a problem should be on these apps. It's not pushing people away, it's just pushing people who do need the assistance to be able to have a resource for that assistance. But it's also very hard to get them to do that because these are, eBay and whatnot, and very, very powerful, very financially viable corporations. To push them, unfortunately, does sometimes take the government, and officials to step in and push for some type of regulation. But I think we're going to need that and probably see that, but it really just depends on people kind of advocating and stepping up, right? It's the same thing with substance use. After the foundation of AA and NA, it took about 30 to 40 years for there to be kind of a call in regards to awareness about the issue, but it came from legislators, right? It came from famous people and people stepping out and speaking about this and talking about how it's impacted their lives. so people can then relate to that issue. So I think just like kind of what you're doing, right, is bringing awareness, and more and more people that watch this. Then you have a legislator who jumps on and says, well, this is something that we need to look at, right? This is a potential problem that's serious. And with online gambling and with apps, that's, I think, where it's going to come hard first, because that's gotten completely out of control, in my opinion.
It really has. Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. We developed what we call the Industry Reform Initiative. And what this basically is, it's an open proposal for regulating sports cards and TCG breaking activities, right? So we talk about this a lot at Collectors MD. It's all about spreading awareness, like you said. And what we're really talking about is just creating a healthier ecosystem around the hobby, not just helping individual collectors, but addressing the systems that are getting people sucked into these cycles. So right now, a lot of the hobby, especially the live streaming platforms, the apps, they operate in this gray area, right? You've got the gambling style mechanics, you have high risk products, and you have platforms that are marketing to vulnerable people with absolutely zero oversight and zero accountability, right? The lack of oversight is monumental at this point. It's gotten out of control. There's no consumer protection. There's no real education about what's really happening psychologically when people get pulled into these loops, these cycles. So our reform initiative has a few parts. One is focused on advocacy. We're working with mental health professionals, recovery organizations, and even policy groups to help shape better standards and start real conversations about regulation that doesn't kill the fun, but it keeps people safe, right? And as you go through this, I mean, we touch on education, things like teaching collectors, content creators, and even brands and breakers how to recognize and reduce harm. Like, how do you market responsibly? Or how do you talk about breaks, risk, or spending without glamorizing compulsion, right? And then the third piece, and I'm just kind of summarizing because there are a lot of components to this, but the third piece is about collaboration. So building partnerships with recovery orgs like PGCC, the Problem Gambling Coalition of Colorado, which we've worked with to flesh out sort of a franchised version of Collectors MD, which we're calling Unboxed, powered by Collectors MD. They host weekly meetings every Thursday, and so they're an extension of what we're doing. We've partnered with professional clinical facilities like Right Choice Recovery and Birch's Health. We have a referral network. So these are all things that we're working on to make sure that there's an actual safety net for people who need the support. And so at the end of the day, reform for us isn't about policing the hobby or, wanting some governing body like an SEC or a gaming commission to come in and just completely shake things up. It's about protecting the people in it. We want this space to grow, but we want it to grow responsibly and in a healthy and sustainable direction, right? Does that all make sense?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that is the line that we walk at Collectors MD. We don't want to take you away from the fun, but we want to create guardrails so that people can protect themselves. And so if you were advising hobby leaders or platforms, let's say Fanatics or whatnot, what's one safeguard you put in place tomorrow to make things healthier?
I think when signing up, let's say for an account, right, putting something specific to, a warning specific to what this is, what this could potentially lead to, funneling you to a page that has resources, right? So if you think you have a problem with spending, this is a page of resources at the least, right? So at least that if you needed something, you needed some assistance, you had those resources at hand. I'm not saying there should be like, a banner saying, this is dangerous or what have you, right? But again, it's just having ease of access to resources if there is a problem, and resources that are viable for that community, specific to that community that could really help them with those specific challenges to, what's being presented.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to share my screen again real quick. This is another major initiative that we're focused on. Disclaimers is essentially what you brought up, and that's something that you see across the gambling industry.
Yeah.
It's on every ad. If you or you know somebody who has a problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. They provide you with a phone number, a destination, a call to action, things to provide people who may have an issue with a place to go, right? That does not exist in any capacity within the hobby space, despite the fact that we're seeing so many gambling-like mechanics. And so this is an extension of sort of the reform initiative that we're focused on. And so again, the disclaimers, the warning messages that appear directly within streams, listings, and live break environments, that's something we're working towards. And it's not about scaring people, it's about informing them, right?
Yes.
Right now, if you're watching a break or bidding on cards, there's zero context about the risk, the spending, or where to turn if things get out of hand, like you mentioned. So we're working with platforms, content creators, and breakers to add short, clear disclaimers that are subtle but impactful, that both acknowledge the risk and direct people toward resources like Collectors MD. So the example you could see here on the screen is one that we're developing with Jeff Wilson's company, Cards HQ. I know you actually put me through his show that I was on over the summer. And so this is in development. We're also doing this with a variety of other breakers and card shops. And so you'll start seeing this roll out in the coming months, which is monumental for the hobby, right? This is going to be a game changer. So think of it as like the equivalent of a play responsibly reminder you'd see on a gaming site or a gambling site, but built for the hobby, something that says rip responsibly, collect responsibly. If you're feeling overwhelmed or spending more than you can afford, visit collectorsmd.com for free peer support and recovery resources, right? We're also exploring in-stream prompts. So if someone's been in a high-risk session for a while, they'll see a gentle check-in or link to help. It's not intended to be punitive. It's about creating small moments of awareness inside a system that's designed to keep people hooked, like you were just outlining. And the idea is simple. If we can meet people where the behaviors happen right there in the moment and give them a way out or a way to reflect, we can prevent a lot of harm before it becomes a crisis. And that's the heart of the reform work. So we have a lot of aspirations here. There's a lot of work to do to get folks on board. There's a lot of awareness that needs to be spread and educating, but I felt like somebody had to do it. And so that's a huge part of the reason why I started Collectors MD and took the reins. And I'm having, all these conversations with different industry leaders and influencers, content creators to help drive this message, especially to children, right? There are no age gates. Kids can go on Whatnot and buy and sell. They have no idea what they're doing. I have kids reaching out to me on Instagram. Like, hey, I'm 15 years old. I just threw away $1,000. I feel like my life's over. I don't know what to do. I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed clinician. So I don't necessarily have the credentials to be able to provide support, especially to a child. But a huge reason why we're partnering with these therapists, these doctors, these clinicians, so that we can offer that layer of professional guidance as needed. We're also partnered with Gamban, which is an app blocking software that you can download on your phone so you can prevent yourself from going onto Whatnot or Fanatics. That's another thing that doesn't exist within the hobby landscape. You can't self-exclude. You can't set deposit limits. You can't take cool-off periods. So Gamban helps folks do that now.
That's amazing. No, I mean, that's a big, to not have an age restriction on an app like that is so dangerous. I mean, in regards to starting, a developing child into a pattern of behavior that they would have probably not even known about, but then normalizing that is, insane to me, that there is not some type of protection when it comes to age for purchasing on those apps. So I agree with you.
It's crazy. It's mind-boggling that people don't have the wherewithal to realize this is straight up gambling. How are we allowing children entering these ecosystems, these environments, and they're just walking around aimlessly, and they have no idea, all these flashing lights and graphics and breakers and hosts screaming on the lives that you have to bid, you have to buy, driving the sense of urgency, driving this FOMO culture. It's just become out of control. And Somebody needs to do something about it.
It's funny, like when I got back into the field, I've obviously worked in addiction for like most of my life now.
Right.
I get back into sports cards and I'm looking at these mechanisms and I'm like, what is this? Like, why is this how cards are now? I'm like, this is so dangerous. And then that's how I found you, is through that interview with Cards HQ, because I went out and was like, somebody has to be talking about this, because like this is really bad. I mean, and people, somebody has to notice what's going on. I mean, I'm obviously kind of more attuned to these types of behaviors because of like the work that I do. But it's very, I don't want to be like catastrophizing, but it's pretty insane how unregulated and how dangerous it potentially can be.
Yeah, I mean, it's reckless. That's what it is, right? And a huge part of the problem is that the platforms and manufacturers have disguised this entire gambling-like behavior and activity as a childhood hobby that's rooted in nostalgia. Exactly. And they prey on that, right? There was a Fanatics ad or a Tops ad a couple weeks ago that was intended to be wholesome, and it was showing this grandma putting together a one-of-one nameplate set of Pete Alonso for her young grandson. You saw that. So they're creating this narrative around intentional collecting, yet 90% of their business comes from gambling-like mechanics. And that's the danger. That's the slippery slope. And there's no oversight. There's nobody saying you can't do that. And until that happens, until there's some real tangible change or adjustments or oversight, they're going to continue to operate this way. And so all we're trying to do is just redirect the trajectory for the next, 5-10 years as technology improves and this just becomes more and more mainstream and accessible to younger audiences. We want to make sure that if they're not changing their ways, then at least there's a safety net for people to fall back on. In conjunction with that, basically push for reform and advocacy around these changes so that hopefully eventually somebody sees this, whether it be a C-level executive at Fanatics or somebody with a legislative role, and they something has to be done here. We're gonna come in and make some changes.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course, yeah.
Do you think that there would have been such a resurgence in the sports cards world if it wasn't under this type of format?
Are you talking about Fanatics specifically, or
no? Just like this kind of, let's say, coming out of COVID, complete, kind of now everybody, I would say more people, late 30s, kind of 40s, everybody kind of getting and collecting card shows, all this. Do you think that this would exist without, let's say, like the apps and the compulsive kind of spending? Well,
it's a great question, Ryan, and it's something that I've thought about at great length. I think the industry kind of caught lightning in a bottle during COVID, where everybody was on lockdown and didn't know what to do or how to interact. And a lot of people, myself included, stumbled upon breaking and live streaming as an alternative way to engage with other people around a pastime that we all love and cherish, which is sports, right? And for other folks who are interested in TCG, that could be Pokemon or Marvel or Disney or SpongeBob or, whatever vertical or category. It's a beautiful way to engage with a community, right? And it was introduced to a lot of people around this time, 2020, when everybody was stuck at home, and it became increasingly popular. And I think there were a handful of people that participated. They said, this is cool, but I'm good. We're returning to a state of normalcy. And they just went on with their lives. But then there was another massive chunk of people that, kind of stuck around and got sucked in and caved to the gambling like mechanics. And it all happened very, very quickly. And so I don't think reform or oversight was able to sort of keep up with the speed at which the hobby was going. And then enter Fanatics into the equation, and Michael Rubin and his unlimited, access to funds and budgets. They decided to completely take over, and they have all of these different lanes, right? They have their entertainment, they have their collectibles, they have their jerseys, memorabilia, and merchandise and things like that. But they've entered the worlds of gambling with their sports book. They've entered, obviously, the arena as far as live streaming is concerned with Fanatics Live. And they want Fanatics to be a one-stop shop, or a hub, if you will, for all things sports entertainment, right? And they don't really care if there's overlap between the sports book and the live and the merchandising and everything else. It's all sort of aggregated together again into this one hub. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of these advertisements that kind of mimic or mirror casino-like promotions, right? I'll show you a quick example. This is a daily reflection that I wrote a week or two ago, but they sent this promo out to people, or collectors or users of Fanatics Live, and it says, "You've earned this. It's an exclusive offer built for our top collectors. Spend, rip, get rewarded. From Wednesday, October 22nd to Saturday, October 25th. Spend at least $10,000 on live breaks, and you'll receive $1,000 in rewards just for doing what you already love. No opt-in needed. No hoops to jump through." So, I mean, this literally reads like and looks like a DraftKings ad.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But the difference is that there's no oversight, regulation, guardrails, protections, disclaimers, warnings, etc. They're just, egging people on or encouraging people to spend. We're talking about $10,000 in 3 days. That's insane for most people, right? Yeah. And mind you, they did this in conjunction with the release of Topps Diamond Icons, which, by the way, is a 2-box case format, and each box costs $5,000. So guess what? A case of Diamond Icons costs $10,000. And so those people that were on the fence thinking about, I might purchase it, I might not, now have this opportunity to get $1,000 back in rewards, kind of push them over the hump and got them to spend. And that's what we're seeing more and more of, are these casino-like promotions that are being used as marketing tactics that are very predatory, they're exploitative, and they're preying on people and their passions, right? Their ties to, again, childhood hobbies and activities that are rooted in nostalgia. Yeah. So it's all about, how we combat that, right? We have to find a way to break the cycle for a lot of these people who are just sucked in, and offer them, the insight, the awareness, the tools, the resources, so that they can reevaluate why they're collecting in the first place and make sure that they're protecting themselves at all costs.
I think it's interesting enough when you were saying that, like the most beautiful thing that I remember as a kid about collecting sports cards was going to the store, right? Seeing everything in person, seeing the cards on the shelf, talking to the store owners, being there with my dad and my brother, like that's what elicits the good memories for me. Sure. I can't imagine now as a kid in 20 years thinking back like, oh, remember that night I was sitting on my bed at 2 a.m. on my phone and I hit a card. You're not creating those types of memories through that process. Like even now for me, I mean, I've kind of gotten off the apps, and I like I'll go to the store if I want to get some cards, or I'll go to a show. There's enough kind of card shows now that I can go, I can look, browse, see exactly what I want, take the time, and I'm not just kind of compulsively, buy off, on a Wednesday night at 10:30. So it's there. I really like the analogy that you put in there again. It's just like taking that romantic idea from our childhood and then putting it on here where it just makes it nasty, and it's just
dangerous. Yeah. So again, I mean, it's glaringly obvious that there's a problem here.
Yeah.
And the fact that Fanatics, whatnot, Topps, Panini, manufacturers, breakers, nobody wants to call it out or call it for what it is. Like, how are we not calling a spade here, right? We see all of these things play out. We see the Reddit forums, we see Facebook groups, we see people just venting about what they're experiencing, whether it's them or their partners or people they know. There is an epidemic happening and nobody is doing anything about it. And
Yeah.
it's, again, mind-boggling that's happening with people at the helm who have serious power. Like, how is nobody having this open discussion at like the corporate level of a lot of these companies? That's what doesn't make sense to me. So again, we're hopefully creating enough buzz and enough awareness, and we'll continue to do so. We're making so much noise that they have to start doing something. They have to start making changes, right? Right now, we're grassroots. Collectors MD is 8 months old, and I've been a one-man band, this entire time. So hopefully in due time, as we continue to grow, spread awareness, partner with the right organizations, bring the right folks, into content and talk about these things more and more, we'll get to a point where folks like Jeff Wilson, folks like Dan the Card Man or Jeremy Lee, these are different people that we've spoken to in the industry, will continue advocating for what we're doing and help spread the awareness to the wider audiences. So that's what it's all about. It's just reaching people to let them know that we exist so that they can then spread awareness within their circles, their communities, and leverage our tools and resources if or when they need it.
I agree with that. I mean, the power really has to come from within the hobby. I mean, these are the pinnacle individuals that are looked up to as, representatives of the hobby, and, getting them to buy into, what it is that you all are doing, which is amazing work, and them actually taking the step to, put on some type of boundaries, ethical standards, is really, truly amazing. So it really kind of takes that first step to kind of push the agenda forward. And it seems like you all are, you are really doing an excellent job of that. So
yeah, I appreciate that, Ryan. And, I always say, yes, I am the one leading the movement. This is my brand, my company. However, it is a community effort. This is way bigger than Alyx Efron. This is way bigger than Collectors MD. This is a mass issue that we are tackling, we are addressing, and we want folks to know that it's a collective effort. We can't do this alone. We have to do this as a community. And so Collectors MD can be at the forefront of that conversation, but we need the help. We need the support of everyone to spread the word, spread the message. I feel this undying sense of urgency because I feel like there are so many people out there that need support, need help right now. They can't wait, but they don't know we exist. And so, again, I'm not trying to do this for clout or for followers or for, validation or reputation. I just want people to know that there's a support group in place that exists, and they don't have to feel alone or isolated anymore. They can connect with people, peers, or peer support that are going through exactly what they're experiencing. And that's what it's all about. So, yeah. And again, if things like transparency, limits, informed choices, if those things existed and the industry built those things in, we'd prevent a lot of harm before it ever even starts. So again, there's a lot of things that need to change before we get to where we want to be. But the work is being done. It just, it's going to take time. So we're going to transition over to our next segment, which is recovery, connection, and community. So one of the biggest lessons I've learned from recovery is that no one heals in isolation. I just sort of referenced that. And so I want to talk a little bit about your organization, Better Way of Miami, where you're the president and CEO. And so at Better Way of Miami and in peer support spaces like ours at Collectors MD, community is everything. So why do you think connection plays such a critical role in recovery? What have you seen in your experience at Better Way of Miami that sort of showcases that?
It's everything. As human beings, we cannot exist with each other, right? So if a baby's not held within the first 6 months of their life, they die. So human connection is so important. And if you look at it, isolation is what generally comes with addiction, right? So it's everything. I think having individuals with lived experience is extremely important too. So, you mentioned peers, integrating peers into treatment. We have peers at Better Way of Miami, obviously, who assist, but it really kind of takes a village, right? Getting insight, kind of what you've done, right, from different professionals in the field, from different kind of worlds to give their feedback and insight is important, which is kind of the same thing that we do in treatment is, getting people from vocational support to peers to licensed clinical social workers and what have you. It takes a village,
Yeah.
really and sincerely. And that's why I think, residential statistically does very well because you're bringing in that kind of community to get together. Not to say that outpatient treatment is not, and some people that's what they need and that's what they prefer. But in residential treatment, you create that community. You also create like an alumni, individuals that get clean together. They graduate through treatment. They go out into the community. They're brothers or sisters. They have that support for life, people that they can depend on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think lived experience is everything when it comes to recovery leadership. You can read every book, every study, but nothing connects like hearing from someone who's been there, right? I personally myself, and this is something that I'm open about and wear my heart on my sleeve as the founder of Collectors MD, I'm a gambling addict. I had a serious problem for a number of years. I sought outpatient treatment. I went to GA meetings. And what I realized is that, I had a more than just a gambling problem. I had a compulsive spending problem. I was addicted to collecting things. I mean, I did that my entire life. I had 500 plus pairs of sneakers at one point in my 20s. So it was a deep-rooted issue. And so when I finally was able to submit to step one of Gamblers Anonymous 12-step program, I realized that I had a problem that was much bigger than I was able to manage on my own, right? And I needed to seek support. And so that's been a part of my journey now for 3 years. And, it's a lifelong commitment. And so when you've lived through it, you don't lead from theory, you lead from things like empathy, right? You understand things like shame and the rationalizations and the highs and lows that come with compulsive behavior. And that makes the guidance real, again, not clinical. And so recovery, whether it's from addiction, gambling, compulsive collecting, alcohol, isn't something you do alone. It, like you said, takes a village, and you need people who've walked that same road who can say, yeah, like I've been there. I know how it feels. Here's what helped me. And so that's what we try to build through Collectors MD, which is like basically a village inside of the hobby. So the therapists, the recovery professionals, the collectors, the content creators, all working together to make this space healthier, because healing isn't top down, right? It's side by side. So I really appreciate the fact that you brought that up, and it is exactly how we sort of view things and approach things at Collectors MD. So in collecting, again, the opposite happens a lot, just in terms of like community, right? People hide their habits, they isolate, they lie about their spending, they hide purchases, they hide packages. So how do we normalize these conversations so these people feel less like confession and more like connection?
Well, I think, in recovery, let's talk about, the substance use recovery, right? You have like Al-Anon, right? Where family members and friends are taught, or they're given a safe space to kind of talk about their experience having a family member or a friend who's in active addiction. I think it would be a beautiful addition to also, have, I'm not saying maybe you guys or somewhere else, right? A similar kind of concept where family members or friends, right? Individuals who don't necessarily know how to approach those very delicate issues can gain some insight from others with the same lived experience of what's worked for them, right? You know, shame is real, and nobody likes to be confronted in certain situations. But what I would say is that if you have a family member or a friend who is engaging in these behaviors where it's looks like it's turned into a compulsion, it's generally better to say something, I would say, than to not say something, out of fear of offending them or what have you,
Sure.
just because they might not see it, or they might have rationalized it and not seeing it as an issue, right? But again, it doesn't matter what's said to a person. It helps, but it ultimately is up to that person to make that decision to want to change.
Right. Yeah. There are things like empathy and storytelling and shared experience and community engagement. And storytelling specifically, I think is important because that's what
Yeah.
collecting is supposed to be, right? Sort of storytelling through things like objects and memories and meaning. And if we can keep that spirit alive, it becomes healing instead of harmful.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things that need to be done to change the trajectory, again, the direction that we're headed in, so that we can offer a healthier and more sustainable hobby for everyone, especially the young kids. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we can't do it by ourselves. So isolation is no good, no matter how you look at it. We can't heal alone. We have to heal in group. And the hobby really is intended to be a community. It's intended to be all about interaction and engagement. And so if we're going to, collect as a community, let's heal as a community, right? So we're going to transition over to our final segment, which is the rapid fire round. And so I'm going to ask you a question and provide me with the first thing that comes to mind. All right.
Sure.
Let me know when you're ready.
Ready.
All right, let's do it. The most important lesson recovery has taught you.
Most important lesson recovery has taught me is humility.
Awesome. One myth about addiction you wish everyone understood.
That it only affects poor people.
That's really a really good one. A simple practice anyone can use to stay grounded.
Mindfulness. If you don't know what it is, YouTube it.
Great answer.
Yeah.
The biggest parallel between recovery and collecting.
Sense of community.
That's what I was waiting for. I just
Yeah.
said it. So, and one line you'd tell anyone who's struggling right now to find balance.
Go listen to these podcasts. Yeah, I've listened to most of them, and they're amazing. They're beautiful, and I've enjoyed it very much. And this is outside of my purview, but it's something that I appreciate that you're doing this work, because this is a hobby that I care about and I love, and I want to pass down to my kids, and I just don't see it going in a very nice direction. So I just think that things need to be looked at a little bit differently, and through organizations like this, that allows people to still enjoy the hobby, and not have a detrimental effect on their life.
I really appreciate you saying that, Ryan. It means the world that you've taken the time to listen to most of the episodes. We put out hours and hours worth of content over the last 8 months. And again, it's all about spreading awareness and getting people on board with this movement and what we're doing. And so I can't thank you enough for joining me today, not just for the conversation, but for the work you do every single day, helping people rebuild their lives. And what I hope listeners take away from this episode is that recovery and collecting aren't opposites. They're both about understanding ourselves, setting boundaries, and choosing clarity over compulsion. And of course, community is everything. So if you want to learn more about Ryan's work or the programs at Better Way of Miami, check out bwom.org or reach out directly. We'll provide Ryan's contact info in the description below. And if this conversation hit home for you, if collecting has started to feel heavy, compulsive, or out of control, I want you to know there is support. At Collectors MD, we host free weekly peer support group meetings every Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern. You can join at collectorsmd.com, follow us on Instagram at collectorsmd, and subscribe on YouTube for new episodes of the Collectors Compass, Behind the Breaks, and Collectors MD features, also streaming on all major platforms. Ryan, thank you again for being here and for helping bridge the gap between clinical recovery and cultural reform. And to everyone listening, remember, recovery doesn't always mean walking away. Sometimes it means learning to stay just a little bit differently. I'm Alyx Efron. This is the Collector's Compass, reminding you to collect with intention, not compulsion. We'll see you next time.